Next, Catherine Sorrells breaks down the three dimensions of globalization, or these three types of globalization. They are economic, political, and cultural globalization. And really, they're always kind of entangled, and it's actually hard to kind of pull them apart. But Sorrells, I think she's trying to kind of like organize them by a schema and give us a way to talk about, these different aspects of globalization. And so the first one is economic globalization. And really, this is just the spread of multinational corporations. And what are multinational corporations? This is like big business and how they are in multiple nations at the same time. So think like something like Apple, IBM, and how they, they're all over the world. They go to like Ireland for tax breaks, and how they try to create the best situation for their products so they can sell them cheaper and at a higher profit, right? And in multinational corporations, global business and global markets have become in a lot of ways more powerful than some nation states. And they go in and they set up shop and they're not taxed, and they kind of can, more or less do what they want, right? And because they're as powerful as some governments, right? An intensification of internal trade and flows of capital, international trade and flows of capital. Yes. So more and more trade is going on, more flow of capital. By capital, we mean money, right? And the flow of money. And these interconnected webs of production, distribution, and consumption. Yes, absolutely. So, take for example your shirt. Your shirt might be made from cotton grown in the Kashmir area of India near Pakistan. It might be then made into a shirt in Bangladesh, where it is then distributed out of Bangladesh into Dubai, and then travels from Dubai to be consumed in New York City, right? Something like that. I don't know, but just how things are produced, distributed, and consumed in these webs that connect all over the world. The economic aspects of globalization also magnify the need for intercultural awareness, understanding, and training at all levels of business. This is absolutely true. And for a lot of you who said you were interested in learning how to communicate more efficiently and better across cultures, that connects to the anthropological approach. A lot of what we know of different communication values and communication cross-culturally actually comes from business. So you might be familiar with what's called Hofstede's cultural dimensions or value orientations. And a lot of his data came from IBM and how IBM was trying to market computers and do business internationally. And so they had to come up with, well, what is polite in Brazil? What is considered a normal way of communicating in Japan, right? And so that's when he came up with his sort of value dimensions, like what is considered late? What is considered on time? What is the normal space and distance with which you stand from someone else, right? How are decisions made, right? And that really comes from the anthropological approach, looking at business, right? Looking at business. So what do yellow flowers mean in Ukraine, right? And using those cultural patterns to effectively communicate in international business, right? Okay, what are the implications for intercultural communication? So cultural differences in values, norms, behaviors play a major role in team building. Yes. Yeah, what does it mean to be part of a team for a culture that doesn't value individuality, right? Versus a culture that does that values individuality, right? Or to be part of a team that puts the group ahead of the individual. How are decisions made, right? In that culture, right? Is it hierarchical decisions? Is it group decision making? Oh yeah, job satisfaction? What constitutes a good job and a meaningful life in a well-paid job, right? In an honorable job, right? It's going to be culturally situated. And then of course, marketing and advertising is key. You need to understand uh, your audience, the culture that you're trying to market to. There's lots of examples of failed marketing attempts in the international context. The Chevy Nova. So Chevy was trying to sell cars in Latin America, and they were trying to sell the Chevy Nova. Nova literally means no go in Spanish, and so needless to say, the car didn't sell very well. And then what's another one, like Pepsi in China, and the translation was Pepsi brings your ancestors back from the grave, something like that. And so you really need to have a cultural understanding if you're going to sell and market your products in an international setting to a particular culture, right? And so economic globalization is a big aspect of globalization. Along with that, it comes with free trade economic liberalization. And so free trade is the loosening of markets and the deregulation of trade and between countries and nations and different pacts and agreements that countries have about buying and selling and distributing resources and goods. And so they'll often sign free trade agreements. And these free trade agreements are, yes, they're liberal in the sense that they nothing to do with liberal ideology, but we call them liberal because they deregulate trade, right? Often they exploit the worker, and the rich become more powerful, right? The powerful become more powerful through these kinds of agreements. One good example of this is NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. This was an agreement between, I think, Mexico, the U.S., and Canada. And what it did is it created free trade zones. Have you heard of maquiladoras? Maquiladoras are essentially sweatshop factories that are on the border in between Mexico and the U.S., where corporations would go and set up shop, and they weren't regulated, right? They weren't privy to U.S. laws about exploiting workers or environmental standards or anything like that. And so they would go and set up shop in these free trade zones in the borderlands, and they can maximize profit. Also, yeah, this caused a lot of companies to quote unquote move to developing countries, right? This race to the bottom is what it's called, what's quote unquote called. So, think about like Nike going to the Philippines and then leaving the Philippines and then going to Indonesia and then leaving Indonesia and, going to Thailand or whatever. Yeah. So how these companies move around to maximize profit, right? The implications of policies are highly controversial and contested. Arguments for NAFTA, free trade agreements. Yeah, there's some school of thought that NAFTA really grew our economy, especially in the 90s. And if it wasn't for NAFTA, our economy wouldn't really have grown. And then most recently, there's been kind of a pushback against, I guess there always was kind of this idea of buying American made. Trump has really tapped into it, the way he's kind of like fighting, or has the perception like he's fighting for American-made goods and American workers, right? He's kind of stolen that issue from the Democrats recently, and so yeah, there are arguments against it, right? And he really plays up the way that Trump does, the way that China might be exploiting our agreements, right? Or the agreements only really help China at the expense of the American economy. So this is highly contested. It does seem like countries need regulation to sort of protect each other's workers, right? Implications for intercultural communication. It propels and displaces people from cultures and countries of origin. Yes, absolutely. So people will often, or immigrants, right, will often flee one country or be pushed from their country of origin to another country for better economic opportunities because uh, because how globalization has set up this inequity, right? And because of that inequity, it sort of propels people to countries where there is more wealth, right? And it creates inequitable dynamics for intercultural communication. Yeah, it creates uh, uh, inequalities in terms of power, right? And how people meet each other, right? They don't interact with each other on a equal plane. They interact with each other in this history and context of unequal power relationships, right? So it's something to keep in mind. And then different people on a global stage experience globalization very differently. Yes, that is huge, right? So, I've been talking about like how easy it is to hop on a plane, right? Which is very privileged position, right? And to keep that in mind, or your ability to travel around the world, right, isn't a given, right? And the act of tourism, for instance, is a very privileged position, right? And so, yeah, a Canadian going to Jamaica for 2 weeks and experiencing the beaches of Ocho Rios is very different experience for someone born in the slums of Kingston, right? Something like that. And so to keep that in mind.